Hello guys, how are we all doing tonight? My name is Jonathan Brandel. I've been in the Sugar Cookie Marketing Group for a few years and Cookie College Group for a few years as well. I want to welcome you all to my very first Facebook Live. If you're watching the replay, go ahead and type replay in the comments and I can know exactly where you guys are, if I can come back and answer your questions later. First of all, can you guys just kind of comment in the section to let me know if you can hear me or not? That'd be great. My computer is kind of having some volume issues earlier, so I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me. I've been in business for about 6 years now. My business name is Brandel Baked Goods. I started off, I'm just kind of making decorated sugar cookies as a way to kind of earn some additional income. My wife was pregnant with my first child, and it just kind of grew from there. I started in an apartment complex, and then we moved into a house, a couple years after that. And we were able to, kind of really expand my business after that. I was able to kind of go from decorating sugar cookies to kind of doing some cupcakes. I did a few events and bazaars as well. I've also done, kind of started doing cookie classes this past year. I've been doing a lot of success with that. So tonight we're going to be talking about 3D printing. I know I've been posting a lot, like both in the Sugar Cookie Marketing Group and also in the Cookie College as well, about different 3D printing things we have going on, the different questions I have, or sorry about, I'm getting over a cold here, so if I cough a little bit, I'll try to keep it out of the microphone as much as possible. Congratulations, Amanda. I'm glad your A1 Mini got delivered today. It's very exciting. Hopefully you can get it set up quickly and as soon as possible start getting printing right away. I'm glad you all can hear me. Thank you very much. So without further ado, go ahead and continue on here. So there's a lot of different 3D printers out there. For the most part, they're all work the same way. They have like a spool of filaments connected to a tube and a nozzle on the hot end, and basically send a file from your computer to your 3D printer, and whatever magic happens between that basically tells the printer how to print whatever file that you have, whether it be a cookie cutter or a model or a picture or some sort of toy that you have for kids. Basically the computer is telling the printer how to print that file exactly. And so it's kind of like interesting because I've been taking some online college courses about 3D printing, just kind of like from my own personal career path, kind of going forward with that. And it's kind of interesting to see like the videos I've been watching are about 10 years old, and just to see like how the technology from 10 years ago to now, today, it has just changed so much and so drastically with 3D printing. And I'm just kind of excited to see how it's going to change in the next 10 years. I'm kind of excited to see like how Bambu has kind of stepped up in the past couple of years to be like this, this major powerhouse in the 3D printing community, kind of bringing like super cheap and user-friendly printers to basically everyday common person, so that people like us as bakers can be able to print out our own cookie cutters and print out our own things that we need for our business as well. So pretty much the main filaments we use like for 3D printing are PLA. Basically it's just the most common, most cheapest, and most widely available for people that they can use for their own printing abilities. Within the PLA itself, there's lots of different kinds. You have like your regular, just generic PLA. There's like you have glow in the dark you have glow in the dark filaments and glitter filaments. Those have to be printed in a special way because there's like kind of basically little particles inside of them, and so if you don't use like the proper nozzle size, it could end up actually chewing up your nozzle and making it wear down a lot quicker than normal. So generally, when I print like with kind of a more abrasive filaments, I like to use like a hardened steel nozzle rather than just like a brass or copper, which might be like commonly found like some of the endo printers like way back in the day. I also like to use like a 0.6 millimeter nozzle, just because those are able to kind of have like a wider opening, and so those filaments that have the abrasive stuff in them can actually pass through a lot easier and a lot smoother without having risk wear and tear in your nozzle. Same thing goes like with wood filament, because it has like wood particles or wood fibers inside of there. I like to print with wood a few times. The cool thing about wood filament is that you can actually sand and stain and paint it just like real wood, and when it actually is printing out itself, it can actually smell the wood, fumes in the air, which actually makes it really smell nice. There's also like another filament that people like to use sometimes. It's called PETG, and it's kind of similar to PLA, except it likes to be printed at hotter temperatures, and likes to be, it's a lot tougher than PLA is, and doesn't warp as much as PLA can, but sometimes it can be a little bit more brittle as well. And then I'll go ahead and show, there's a whole lot of other types of filaments. This is kind of like just a small list of kind of different filaments that I found online. As you can see, it's a whole wide range of filaments right here that people can use for different properties they have. Whether you need to be like strong, or you need to be like kind of flexible, or you need to be able to handle wear and tear a lot easier, or high heat. And it kind of gives you basically a chart right here. It tells you like what some other properties are, and like what some of their general uses are. One of the things I kind of found cool is looking at this is that there's like conductive filaments. So like if you're using electronics, you could use that in electronics as well. Or there's like magnetic filament as well. So you can, if you're like making something like for a car or something like that, you can also print pretty much anything that you want to really with all that kind of stuff. And so we also have many different kinds of nozzles for 3D printers. The main nozzle that comes with most 3D printers is just the 0.4 millimeter nozzle. It's basically standard, run-of-the-mill average nozzle that there is. There's also a 0.2 millimeter nozzle, which might be able to guess that because it's a 0.2 millimeter, it's actually smaller than the regular 0.4 millimeter nozzle, so it's actually prints slower, but it has a much finer detail. Whereas like the larger, 0.6 or 0.8 millimeter nozzles, they can print, not as much detail, but they can also print quicker because you have more filaments coming out in the nozzle itself. And actually can print like larger models or like larger prototypes a lot quicker as well because you have more material coming out, and makes it be able to print a lot quicker than like you're using like a standard 0.4 millimeter nozzle. I also have like different kinds of heat beds for your 3D printers. The standard one that pretty much comes with, I think, pretty much all Bambu printers these days, it seems like, is kind of that gold sparkly heat bed, and that's what's called textured PEI plates. Basically, what that allows it to do is it takes away the ability to really need to use glue on your heat beds, because like back in the days of the Ender days, which we all like to try and forget. We have like these big kind of like black, flimsy heat beds, and you usually require like a lot of glue on them to be able to hold our prints in place and keep them on the bed without having to fall off and fall apart. So whereas the textured PI plate basically allows it to be a little bit of a hotter bed, and so it doesn't need any glue on there as well to keep the print on the plate, but also because of the texture on it, it kind of like essentially like grips the print onto the printer itself. What's kind of nice about those too is because it has a little sparkly finish to the bottom of your prints. So if you ever noticed your prints kind of nice sparkly finish on the other side, is because of the basically the texture of the plate transferring to the print itself. And then we also have the regular cool plates as well, like we usually use. They do need glue sometimes, and sometimes quite often. Like the name cool plate implies, it does run at cooler temperatures. It doesn't have to be necessarily as warm or as hot as a textured PEI plate does. But both the plates you can pretty much use for quite a while without having to really clean them and stuff. But you can also just use, like, if you notice that your prints are kind of starting to fail a little bit more often, or if they're coming off the plate and the hotbed more than they should, or they're just flat out not even sticking to the plate itself, then you can just basically use warm water and Dawn dish soap, but to kind of basically get all the finger oils and all the debris and dirt and stuff off of there, and then dry it with a paper towel, and it'll work just fine. One of the things that's also good to know about when you're 3D printing, I know like some of the printers, like I think the P1P series and also the X1 Carbon have the enclosures on them, and then some of the other ones like the A1s and the P1S I think is also the one that doesn't have the enclosure. The reason that enclosures are handy for 3D printing is because if you're like in a room that has like a little kind of dust flying around, or if there's like a lot of drafts like from a window or an air duct or something like that, and that can tend to basically kind of put dust and debris on your bed and make it so the filament can't actually stick to your bed. Or if you have if you have like an air draft or something coming through your room, or if you have a window or a door open, basically causing like a cool breeze to come through, that can help to cool your plate down too much and cool the filament down too much. So basically your filament kind of starts to cool down before it even touches the previous layers of your print, and so when that happens, it's not hot enough to stick to the previous layer, so it just doesn't stick to it at all, and then you basically just get a big old giant ball of filament spaghetti, and then you have a failed print. So if you do have a printer that doesn't have any enclosure on it, I would either recommend, kind of like making a DIY one, just like out of a cardboard box or something like that, or I know that you can buy some third-party enclosures as well that you can just kind of put over your printer to make sure that it doesn't get any air drafts in there or any dust in there as well. So there's lots of different sites that you can go to find the STL files, and so an STL file is basically the file that you can find on the internet or that you can design yourself in many different programs that tells you, what your cookie cutter or what like model or toy or whatever is going to go into your slicer and get set into your printer. So there's actually tons of sites that you can go to. The main one, since we all have, Bambu printers for the most part, is just MakerWorld. They have, tons and tons and tons of models and designs that you can go through. They have like, little collections and little contests and stuff as well. You can just kind of just browse through and just see all the different models they have. What's cool about the Bambu printers is because they have the AMS, ability to go with them as well, so you can have, multicolor printing, which really opens up the door to having just so many really cool designs and models and creations that people are able to do. Here's kind of like a cool Lego castle it looks like. So that's a really good website to use, and because it's connected to the Bambu Studio slicer and also the Bambu Handy app, you can also kind of print from your phone as well. Or if you find like a file on your Bambu Handy app, if you want to print at home later, you can always save it to that and open it up in MakerWorld as well. Another good website to use is Thingiverse. They have a lot of kind of simpler models, not necessarily as complex as some other sites, but they have some really cool things you can go through. Some cool dragons, it looks like. So actually, that's kind of funny. Little 3D printer file there. Looks like it's an ender printing and ender printing another ender, so that's kind of funny to see that there. Another website I use sometimes is Printables. They have a kind of point system that you can basically, like, kind of similar to, I don't know if you've ever noticed how, like, sometimes people like have like points and stuff on the Bambu websites. That basically, depending like how many models you like, how many like designs that you can upload to them, you got like, little points and like little point system. And once you get like an X amount of points, you can redeem it for gift cards and things like that, which is kind of cool. But they also have a good selection models that you can go through as well. Another one that they do have some free files, but some of them are kind of paid for files as well. It's called Colts 3D. You can kind of just go through here as well, and list up basically, like different categories that you can do. If you do like any home decor, you can explore that as well. Or if you want to do anything for your kitchen or whatever, you can kind of basically just scroll through there and kind of find different ideas. You're kind of stuck about what you want to design or print, or kind of have an idea what you want to have for your kitchen or your bathroom or your dining room or whatever. You kind of scroll through all these and kind of get an idea of what you want to do. Another good site that I like to use, this website called Things. These are pretty much, for the most part, is just a series of designers and collectors that they have paid files on them. Depending on what files they have, they might be free. Some of them might be you have to pay like a monthly fee. Some of them you might have to pay like a one-time fee. But for the most part, I wouldn't necessarily say it's more better, more complex, or advanced than other places, but just based on some of the people I've seen, I think it gives them more like creativity, I guess you could say. It seems like to me, in my opinion, it was just from my little bit of experience, just looking at models and stuff. It seems like for the designers that actually get paid to do designs, and the ones that they have like the monthly fees or whatever, it seems like they kind of like have, I guess, like higher quality, more interesting models out there to design. Same thing with the Patreon website. Basically, it's just a collection of different designers that kind of have different monthly subscriptions you can buy too, and for the most part, pretty much the Patreon and also the Things designers and members, when you pay the monthly fee, depending on what tier system you have, sometimes they have like a non-commercial license where you can download the files and print them for your personal use, but you can't necessarily sell them to make money. But if you pay a higher tier, then you can get that ability to sell whatever prints that you make as well. And then there's also another website that is paid. This is called STL Flicks. And it's kind of interesting because they usually do like 1 to 2. It's all multicolor printing for the most part. It's pretty much geared mainly towards Bambu printers, just because of that. But they also, it does work for other printers as well. But they have basically weekly drops, like different kinds of models and designs every single week or so. This is on the more expensive side, so this is like if you're really serious into 3D printing, just like as a career essentially. I think it's like a $300 one-time fee to basically get unlimited commercial use of it. But they do have a lot of cool designs on there. They also have a website as well, like what's called My Store. It's kind of like similar to like an Etsy or Shopify or Square Store. You can basically put on your products, list them out, or you can do orders as well, and basically, have like a little bit of like reports and analytics for how your sales did in that month. So it's kind of very basic. They just started that recently. What's also kind of cool about STL Flicks is, like, depending on what subscription you get with them. Go back here. They have this thing called STL Academy. And basically, it's like essentially like an online 3D printing and business school, essentially. Well, they have lots of different courses. They're all included in your subscription price, depending on what model you get. You can like learn how to go from not selling anything to making money. How to print like a pro. How to learn Fusion 360 from zero to master, essentially. Kind of getting ideas out in the universe about what you want to print, and there's many different courses that you have available from that subscription that you have. And then there's actually one more website I forgot to pull up here. It's called Yegi.com. Basically, it's a search engine of all 3D printing model sites. As you can see, like they have over 6 million models, and basically it'll search, like all these sites I just mentioned previously, plus dozens more as well to find whatever model they're looking for. So let's say we want to look for like a Christmas tree cookie cutter, and then we'll search. And to bring up, all the Christmas tree cookie cutters you can find from all across the internet, and you can just kind of scroll through and see whichever one you might like. And then I'll just click on this one, for example. And I'll tell you this one's a paid for one, so you can just if you wanted to use that, you could add to your cart and do whatever you wanted with that. All right. Does anybody have any questions so far? I haven't seen anything come up yet, so I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Alright, we're going to continue on then. So let's go ahead and go to Bambu Studio. So this is pretty much what this is a slicer program that most of us are going to be using. Instantly once I have Bambu printers anyways. If you don't have a Bambu printer, or if you do have a Bambu printer but use other slicing programs, that's okay. There are many slicing programs out there. There's the Creality Slicer for the Creality Ender computers, the printers. There's Cura as well that I used to use back in the Ender days. That Prusa has their own Prusa slicer as well. And Bambu has their Bambu Studio slicer. There's also Orca Slicer, which is a bit more like an advanced version of Bambu Studio. It has some special advanced features to it. There's also tons of others slicing programs out there, but for today we're just going to be talking about the Bambu Studio one. And so we're going to kind of basically go through each of these little things right here and kind of just basically give just a brief description of them. So when you open up Bambu Studio, this is what's going to pop up. You're going to have a picture of your build plate. You're going to have what your printer is, what kind of plate you have on there, your filaments, and all the other properties and settings as well. So here you can kind of change, whatever printer you have here. So you have all your Bambu printers, and then you can have the A1, the 0.2, 0.4, 0.6 nozzle, mini, the P1S, and so on and so on. And so mine just defaults to my X1 Carbon at the 0.4 nozzle, just because that was the first printer I had, and that's just what it defaults to. But you can also, change it to, like, say, for example, if you had the A1, you had like a 0.6 nozzle, you would just change it to that, and it automatically resize your bed for you and change your settings. The one thing that you do need to know is if you, because the 0.4 nozzle comes standard on your printers, so if you change it out from like a 0.4 to like a 0.6, then in order to get your printer to recognize it, you have to go to where it says device, which is where all your printers are located. So basically, this is what happens. This is what pulls up whenever you send an STL file from your slicer to your printer. This will basically give like a live view of your printer. So if you just click on play, you can kind of see the inside of my X1 Carbon right now. There's nothing printing currently. If you go up here to where the printer is, you can just select whatever printer you want to. So let's select our A1. And then if you go to over here where it says, so this is my A1 camera currently. This is my computer area, my TV. This is my baker's rack. Eddie's kind of over there on the table right there. And go to printer parts, and you can check whatever nozzle you have. So hardened steel or stainless steel. Hardened steel nozzles are going to be better for printing abrasive filaments, such as like glow in the dark or the wood filled ones. Stainless steel is kind of like, they do well, but they're not going to wear and tear a lot easier than the hardened steel ones are. And you can just change your nozzle diameter to whatever you have. So 0.4, 0.6, or 0.8. And then go back to here, and you can change whatever plate you have. So there's many different kinds of plates that you have as well. And then, so this is where your filament location is. So if you have like an AMS printer, it'll probably have 4 filaments up here. Sometimes when you load a file, it'll have like a bunch more colors up here as well. If you just click on the add, you can add another filament if you want to. If you clicked on the minus, you can take away a filament. If you click on this little symbol right here, this basically synchronizes your filament list to whatever your AMS has. So we'll go ahead and swap it back to X1 Carbon with a 0.4 nozzle. Switch over to device. Switch the printer to X1 Carbon as well, because for some reason, even when you select the printer here and then click to sync to the AMS, it doesn't actually sync to that printer until you actually go into device and then click on the printer right here. So we've got it synced up. Go ahead and synchronize our filament list. And this is all the filament that's loaded inside of my AMS currently. So we have our silk, gold silk filament in one, and I have just regular generic PLAs in the other ones. And you can edit this both on your printer itself, like on the touch screen, or you can also edit it in the slicer as well. You can just click on this little check mark box here, and it brings up all of these settings. I don't really change anything too much with this really. The only things I would change normally is like I'm printing like with silk, for example. I would when you're printing with silk, you actually want to print a little bit hotter temperature than the standard 220. I like to usually print mine like at 230. Seems to get the best results for me. So if we just change that to 230 for the first layer, and then make sure we also change it to 230 for all the other layers as well. That'll just tell the printer to make sure that it prints the nozzle temperature at 230 degrees rather than 220 for the entire print. And we can also change the temperatures for our heat beds as well, but we don't necessarily need to do that. One thing that I do have noticed is go on the cooling setting, because I know on the X1 Carbon at least, it has like little cooling fans to the left on the inside of the X1 Carbon printer. And sometimes if you have prints, you have like a fan like right here essentially, and this would be like the front of your printer. And so sometimes if you have like prints right here, if that fan is like strong enough, it basically can kind of essentially cool the print down too much, or sometimes even to basically like blow the print off. So you can do a couple things. You can either just set your print further back away from the fans, or what I like to do always is just basically just change my auxiliary cooling fan speed down to 0. Just because I haven't really noticed any benefit to having it at a higher speed. And so what you can do is if you change your filament settings, you can say this, for example, so that when you come into your print next time, you don't have to necessarily change all the settings again. And so if you go over here to what I have saved already, this is my AMS filament that I have right here. And these are already the settings I have saved for filaments as well. So like I have like a PETG filament setting that I used to make my multi-board for my cookie, my icing colors and my flavors and stuff like that. And this is like the setting they have for like the PLA with the cooling fan turned off I just mentioned a second ago. And this is a filament setting I have for when I'm printing silk filaments. So for like changing filament types, or have different presets for specific projects, you can always just save your filaments right here. You can also go down to where it has all the presets for your filaments. And so basically, if you load all of these filaments into here, it'll automatically, the slicing program will automatically basically switch all the filament settings that it needs to in order to optimize your prints. So if you wanted to, we could just change this to, just like say, the Bambu glow-in-the-dark PLA, for example. It will automatically change all the filament settings to that, so that when it prints, it'll print with the pre-made settings in here already, so that you don't have to go through and mess about with all the settings, because the Bambu slice is already taking care of that for you. Alright, so sometimes if you open a Bambu Studio, this little green box for advanced can be checked on or off. I like to have it on just because it has a lot more advanced options to kind of make me have more control over my printing abilities and make me have more control over what the final result's going to be. So if it is turned off for some reason, you just got a small amount here, I would just recommend turning that on as well. And this little drop down box right here kind of gives you basically your nozzle size and layer height abilities. So again, like the filament as beforehand, you can have different settings for your printer saved on here. So this lithophane settings is, see if you don't know what a lithophane is. Basically, it's like it's pretty much like a picture that is backlit that you can print with like a 3D printer. If you want to look that up on Maker or whatever, there's tons of examples on there. Basically, this is what I use like when I'm printing lithophanes. These are all the settings I use for when I was printing my multi-board. So like if I want to print like more on my multi-board, I would just go to this, I would click on that, and then it would automatically change all of my printer settings to whatever I had saved on that. And this is what I use for printing HeatForge pictures as well, which uses the AMS to kind of basically take a picture and create like a 3D image of it, kind of like a painting almost. And these are all your layer heights. So basically our standard is a 0.2 millimeter standard height. If you go to the lower layer heights, it will give you finer and finer details, but it'll also take a long time to print whatever you're printing. Conversely, if you go to like a bigger layer height, it'll print a lot quicker, but you'll lose a lot of details and quality in that as well. So I don't basically change any of these really necessarily, unless like the file I'm printing, kind of the designer says to change whatever setting I need to. So go ahead and go through and basically kind of go through like whatever settings I like to use when I'm printing stuff. Basically, this is what I use like for pretty much 95% or so of my prints, like either be a cookie cutter, or a model, or a toy, or whatever. This is what I usually use. So I generally use a 0.2 millimeter standard layer height. And then when I do my seams, I like to do kind of the back of the object. Actually, let's go ahead and actually open up a file really quick so you can kind of see this better. So go to File, Import. We'll go to what I had saved already. As you can tell, I have hundreds and hundreds of files to print and have printed. Let's go ahead and open up this Crystal Dragon, I guess. Let's discard that for now. Okay, so this is like a little Crystal Dragon that's loaded up here. It already defaulted to what the silk filament is because that's what the file had it defaulted to. If we wanted to change it to something else, we could, just, go to our AMS or whatever we have. We'll just change it to the gold silk when we have loaded. And if you didn't want to have this 0.16 layer height, we just change it to the standard layer height. You can discard this modify. So sometimes when you change a setting different from what the file has on there already, it'll basically tell you what original value is on there and what new value is on there. You can either choose if you want to use the modified value, or you can just basically discard that. So we're going to discard this one for now. And so when you have So every 3D model basically is going to have some sort of seam attached to it, just because every layer has a start and stop points. There are ways to basically minimize seams and basically make them so you can't see them, but basically you're going to have like a little line of dots essentially that kind of tells you where the model ends and starts and begins. And it's not necessarily a big deal always, but sometimes if you are just looking for like something that's kind of a higher quality and looks less 3D printed, you can worry about it. So I like to use either a line or back, because it basically puts the seam on like in one straight line essentially where it can't be seen. I don't like to do random, because it kind of like gives basically a randomized appearance for where all the seam is, and so rather than like having one seam on the model itself, it kind of gives like a bumpy texture pattern to the model itself, which I don't always like and enjoy. So I'd either do a line or back for my seam position. I don't really worry about any of this right here, just because I don't understand most of it. In general, I don't ever do ironing. Ironing is basically when the nozzle kind of, adds a little bit of extra filament to when it extrudes from the nozzle itself against the surface of whatever you're 3D printing. Basically, kind of tries to get a more smooth effect. To me, that's not necessarily a good thing, because it takes a lot of extra time and a lot of extra filaments for a quality that's really honestly not that much more impressive than just kind of changing some other settings to make it look better. We've got a wall generator. We have a classic, or what's called a Arachne wall generator. Classic is what you're going to use for the majority of the time. I'll get to an example of how to use an Arachne generator a little bit later on as well. And let's see, Travis says, can you show an example with a cookie cutter after this one? Yeah, I'll get to a cookie cutter example in a little bit. But yeah, definitely will do. And then let's see here. Order of walls isn't necessarily that big of a deal. I haven't really noticed much. And then so go over to our next tab, strength. So basically, this is going to tell the printer like how strong you want your model to be. So if you're printing a cookie cutter, you're going to want it to be strong, because it's going to be used a lot. You're going to have a lot of downwards force. So your hand is kind of gripping and pushing down into your dough, and it's going to require a lot of strength and durability to last a long time without breaking on you. So in general, I like to just up my wall loops or perimeters from 2 to 3. So basically, what that means is like for each layer, essentially, it's going to print 3 walls around and around, and before it prints in the infill. The top surface pattern, I just leave it at default for the most part. You can change it if you want to other things, depending on what you want your printer to look like, but it's not necessarily a thing that you have to do. Let's see here. So sparse, infill, and density. This is basically going to be your infill when you're printing. So you have your walls that prints around, and then the infill is going to be basically what's printing in between the walls. And so what I like to do is, if I have 3 wall loops, I like to do just 10% infill. Just because with 3 wall loops, it already makes it pretty strong as is, and I don't need a whole lot of infill. And I also like to use, for my infill pattern, you can choose from a lot different here. I like to use gyrate for the most part, just because it doesn't really crisscross with each other. I know the grid default is on there for some reason, but in my experience and the experience of like other 3D printers I've heard about as well, grid is like pretty much like one of the worst infill patterns to use, because basically the nozzle will crisscross itself like over a printed layer as well. And so essentially the nozzle tip is going to be hitting like a 3D printed layer, and basically can knock either the print off or knock the nozzle off, and it's causing more wear and tear in the nozzle itself. And I also like to check this infill combination box. Basically, it automatically combines infill patterns to basically use less infill than what's necessary. So it actually saves time and filaments when you're printing, which is always a good thing to be able to save time and money. So I like to have this on pretty much always, so I can save that way as well. Speed I don't really worry about necessarily for the most part. Only time I do worry about is if I'm printing like with silk PLA like this Dragon is right now. Then I would just change the outer walls like from 200 to like maybe 80 or so. Just because when you're printing with silk PLA, it can kind of create a shinier effect with the PLA itself, because silk PLA likes to print at a hotter temperature, but also really slow compared to normal PLA. If you want to get that nice shiny effect to it as well. And then supports. I'll get to an example of supports in a second, because we don't really have a good example for this one as well. And then this is like the kind of so we have, like, if you remember, like back in the Ender days, if you have like kind of skirts and brims and wraps and stuff, this is basically what kind of help to keep your print on the bed itself. Like I said, the Bambu Studio likes to default to an auto brim. I find that for the most part it's not really necessary, just because the textured PEI bed basically helps the print stick to the bed almost always. There are some cases where you might want to have like a little bit of a brim, like if you have like tiny details or something like that. It's not always necessary though. Prime tower is only really necessary if you're doing any multicolor printing. We can talk about that in a second here when I get to a multicolor print as well. And then you have your slicing mode. It's just like regular. You can do print by object. For example, if you have like two smaller objects on here, you could have it print like one object in this corner, and then print one object in this corner as well, without having to change the bed out or anything like that. But it's not necessarily a thing that you have to do. And there's also a spiral vase mode, which is kind of a cool feature. I'll show an example of that in just a few minutes. We'll go ahead and actually show an example of a cookie cutter first, since that's what the majority of us are going to be printing with. So we'll go to New Project. We're not going to save this here. Discard all that. I'm going to go ahead and open up our cookie cutter example. This is a rectangle multicutter that I did for somebody in the Cookie College earlier this week or last week or sometime, and I also posted it in there as well. Basically, it's just one giant cutter essentially, with 4 smaller rectangles on here. So when you press down on the dough, rather than making one rectangle, it does 4 rectangles all at once. And so let's go ahead and show an example of how to print like a cookie cutter, and kind of how you would go about doing that. Let's see, so we'll go ahead and we'll change this just like a regular PLA without any cooling on it. We'll go ahead and go back to our quality here. Make sure this is all good. We'll leave that alone for now. Don't need ironing. We'll leave the wall generator alone for now. And our strength. So because we are printing a cookie cutter, because especially the cookie cutter this large, it's going to require a lot of extra downward force and pressure on it. So you want to make sure that you have your wall loop set to 3. And then, just because it is a little bit bigger of a cookie cutter, it's going to require a little bit more force, we could just leave the infill density at 15, or we could leave it at 10. We'll go ahead and change our infill pattern to gyroid. And because that's actually I'm going to give us some more strength inside as well. I'll turn our infill combination on so we can save time and filament that way. And our speed should all be just fine. Don't need to change anything in there. Supports, we don't need supports. We'll get to this example with supports a little bit later after I do this cookie cutter example. I'll do others. We're not going to need the prime tower because we're not doing any multicolors with this. We don't need a brim. Okay, so we'll go ahead and slice it. So sometimes when you slice something in your slicer program, it gives up this warning. Says it seems the object, whatever it is, has a floating cantilever. Please reorient the object or enable support generation. So basically what this is saying, if we shrink that down a bit, is that it's not going to be able to print this little overhang right here, because it's going to try to print in midair. And so what it wants us to do is it wants us to reorient our model or use supports so that this little thing right here can actually print, since it can't print it through in midair. So to do that, it's going to be pretty simple. We're just going ahead and go back and click on our model and close that out. And so now we have this little toolbar up here. And so there's a lot of different things on here as well that we can do. If you want to add another model on here, you can add it as well. If you want to add another plate, like for some people, like if you have multiple plates as well, if you have a really big large object that you want to split into different parts, you just put it on different plates as well, so you can print each plate separately. But for the most part, that's not going to be necessary for us. We have this auto orient. Sometimes, like when you import a model, you're not really sure how it's going to, load up. So to print in the best position, you can hit the auto orient button. So we'll go ahead and hit this one. And so if you noticed, it flipped the model from where this little flat part was on top to where it's on bottom now. Because the slicer program knows that it's going to print the best way in this position right here. We can also do that a couple of different ways as well. So if you undo that, then we have this on here. Then we can also, we have what's called lay on face. And so we can actually lay it directly on that face as well. And again, it'll automatically put it on the back side too. And you can also move your models around depending on which direction you want to go. So you can move it right, up and down if you wanted to. You can also rotate your models. So if you wanted to rotate it, say this direction, this is pretty much useful like if your model loads up in a weird position, or if you want to try to add additional stuff to your build plates. Like if you want to print, for example, a couple of these cutters, like if they're smaller. So we'll go ahead and actually scale this down a little bit. So we can go up here to where the scale button is. And let's say we want to go ahead and scale it down. Let's say just 50% for now. So this is going to scale this 50% smaller in the X direction. And if we wanted to do it, scale it 50% all directions, we would leave the uniform scale on. Or if we wanted to just have it scaled in one direction as well, we could just uncheck that. And it'll only make it scaled in one certain direction. So now what we can do is we have a smaller cutter. We can do a couple things as well. We could do, let's see, if we rotate it some more, we could do this direction, or we can go basically up and down that way, or we can also go up and down that way as well. As you can rotate it however you want to, 360 degrees. And so we can also do is if you wanted to make multiple cutters, for example, at the same time. So say for example, we want to have, if we're having a large corporate art or whatever with a bunch of different rectangle logos and whatnot, we have a bunch of people that are helping us cut the cookie dough, but we only have one cutter. We could add more cutters to the bed. So we could just select a cutter. We could just right click it, and we can do fill bed with copies. And so it'll automatically fill the print bed with a bunch of different copies of our cutter as well. And sometimes it does a fairly good job of doing it. Sometimes they'll put a cutter for example over here. And what these lines are down here, basically, at least on the X1 carbon series anyways, it has these little calibration lines that the printer will do before it actually starts printing. So when you send a file to your printer to print, it kind of goes through this few minute process of basically preparing your printer to print. So it looks like an automatic bed leveling, which is such a huge plus for us. We don't have to worry about manually turning knobs like we did with the Ender printers at all. And also do basically calibrate your filament. So when these little calibration lines at the bottom, make sure that your filament is flowing properly, that it has the right heat and the right speed coming out of the nozzle as well. So that's what these lines are down here. And so we have a bed full of our little cookie cutter copies that we can just leave in the orientation that it had, or we could move them around a bit. So if we move them around a bit as well, it's kind of go over on the print bed, kind of here, there, and everywhere essentially. And then so you'll make sure it'll give us an error too if you put anything outside on the heat bed. So if you just put it back on there as well, it'll be happy and not get mad at you. So we have these cutters all laid out like this, and so we have this option called auto arrange all objects. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take all these objects right here and auto arrange them for us to basically fill the bed as much as possible. And the reason this is handy is because if you want to try to print a lot of things all at once, but you don't want to spend all the extra time trying to basically meticulously move these all around here and there, where you're trying to find the most amount of room and stuff. It'll just automatically do it for you. So you click on that, and it'll just automatically arrange your objects for you, and then boom, it's already automatically arranged all these cutters on here to be the most efficient way to print them as well. Alright, so we don't need to print all of these, so we can go ahead and delete some of these cutters and just go back to the one. I'll go ahead and make this cutter back to normal size again. Alright, now we'll go ahead and click on our cutter again. And there's a few different things that you can do with this. Let's see what we can. Go ahead and show how to put some text onto a cutter side as well. Because I know like a lot of you like to kind of like write the names of your cutters on here. This is kind of obvious. What this cutter is. It's just 4 rectangles. But sometimes other designers, or we like to design our own cookie cutters. But then we go like 2 or 3 months without using them, or forgot where they were. We find them and all of a sudden we don't know what the shape is. And so what we can do is we can add text to our cutter itself to basically remind us what the cookie cutter is actually supposed to be. It's actually quite handy. I've used it a few times. Like Sweet Peak Olive, she labels her cookie cutters as well for the class kits, which has been super helpful as well. So we'll go ahead and add some text to this cutter. So we'll go ahead and select it. Actually, before we get to that, one other cool feature in this is this little measure tool. So when you go to design your cutters in Fusion 360 or Tinkercad or whatever, you can pretty much for the most part tell it inside the program itself how big you want your cutter. But if you want to, if you don't necessarily remember how to do that, or if you want to kind of change it inside Bambu Studio itself to get like a different size. So say for example you wanted to know how big this cutter, this rectangle is, how big you want your cutter to be when you print it. You could just click on your cutter again. You could do the measure tool, and you can select one side of your cutter edge here, and then you can select the other side, and then automatically tell you how long this is. So it's 87 millimeters. I'm not sure that is in inches exactly. When I made this cutter, each rectangle is 2.5 by 3.5 inches. So you can also measure from this wall to this wall as well. And reset that. It kind of basically tells you what the dimensions are. So if you want to make this a bit bigger, you can make it a bit smaller. So basically, based on this measuring tool, you can kind of scale and adjust your cutter or whatever it is accordingly. Alright, let's go ahead and add some text to our cutter here. So we'll go ahead and click on our cutter. We'll go to the text shape here, and we'll bring up our text box. So it has different fonts that we can use. Let's see, got a nice cool font that we can do. This one, I guess, Century. We can change how big of our font size we want it to be. We'll go ahead and have it be size 10. And if we want it to be bold or italics, we can do that as well. The thickness is going to tell us how thick we want our letters to be. Let's go ahead and put in the input text. We'll do a rectangle. And this right here, basically, so you can see that the word rectangle appeared. And so if you see this right here that says surface is checked, what's going to happen is it's going to move this text around onto your cutter as well, and then you can just kind of place it where we want to, and then it'll automatically put your text right onto the cutter itself. Oh no, Julie, I'm sorry, you gotta go to bed. Well, you're in luck though, because it'll be safe, so you can just watch it when you wake up in the morning or the kids are at school or something. Alright, so then we have our text right here. But then, so we have our text on our cutter side itself. We can kind of take a look at it and see how we like it. We can change how much of a gap we want between the text, so we can make it a super small gap in between each letter, or we can make it a bigger gap if we wanted to. I'll put it back down to what we had originally. We can angle it if we wanted as well. So if we want to kind of rotate our text around, we could. Jet back. And we can also add an embedded depth into it as well. So if we wanted to have, this text, not all the way flush to the surface, like we wanted for some reason, kind of have it sunk into our cutter or model itself, we could do that. We can do do more of that maybe. That's not working for some reason. Okay. Anyways, that's how you can add text to the sides of your cutters or anything else you wanted to as well. There is a way that you can do it, like if you wanted to emboss something onto, like if you want to basically have make a little outline of it. So we take away this box right here, what we can do is we have our main cutter body, then our text body as well. So if we wanted to, we can do a couple. This is kind of cool. So if you right click on this entire thing right here, which is going to include our text, and if we do go up here to its split to object. So basically, what this is going to do is we have one big body of our cutter right here, and what's going to happen is if we do this split to object thing, it's going to split this entire model into the cutter and then the words by itself. Julia says, I love Bambu Studio. This is how I label my cutters because I'm offlet Fusion. It's really handy to do it this way too, because in Fusion there is a way to do it, but it's very time consuming and not as intuitive as this, so it's very much easier to do it this way. I'm not the best at Fusion either, Julia, but I've done words on the side like that beforehand until I realized that Bambu Studio has this feature, and it's pretty much changed how the way I do this. Alright, so we select this entire cutter and the words itself. We go up to where it says split to objects, and then right here it says number of currently selected objects is 2. So we have our cutter is one object, and then our text is another object as well. And so what we can do if we wanted to is we can also use the move feature, and we can move this text basically into the cutter itself. And if you wanted to, then what we can do is we can select both the bodies again, both the text, and then we can basically just, I'm trying to remember it now. I believe it's actually, did this earlier today and I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. I can't quite remember, but basically what happens is you can select this, you can essentially just cut this out entirely, and it'll cut out the word rectangle from the cutter itself. Alright, we'll worry about that later. So we can also do, so this is basically pretty much what you can do for the most part for cutters, but if we take a look at some other models, we have some other cool features that we can use as well. So for example, we try out like a multicolor prints. Go ahead and do a new project for that. So now that with the Bambu printers, a lot of us have AMS and stuff, and we have like a list, essentially like, filament poop waste that happens when you do multicolor prints. But there's a few things that you can do to basically minimize the waste, or at least get the most amounts. of use from your waste as possible. If we go ahead and open up this file right here. So this is a Christmas Santa Pikachu ornament. It's on Maker World, I believe it was. And so if we were to basically change all of our printer settings to print out this cutter. Don't worry about the colors on that, it's fine. So one thing I want to go back to, so originally we had this wall generator was sent to Classic for the most parts. Arachne wall generator is good for models with like fine details. So for example, like we have like fine details like around the eyes and the mouth, the candy cane and stuff. You kind of zoom in, you can see like all these like weird little things on there as well. So Arachne wall generator is good for like things like if you're doing like a logo or doing like little pictures or whatever. It's kind of good for getting those like smaller, finer details that you can't necessarily get like with a regular Classic generator. And so if we go back to our multicolor option, so we want to have our prime tower enabled for our multicolor prints. The reason is because when you do that, in the corner over here, it's going to have like a little essentially like tower that prints. When each layer, each color change, it's going to poop out some filament down the chute and then print essentially a layer of filament right here. They're basically trying to clean up any remaining color filament that has from the previous layer before it continues to print the next color. And so you can do a couple different things to help minimize that poop waste. One is to basically, if you see this, sometimes you have models load up into your computer that has this like error code that says there's non-manifold edges, and it asks you to repair them. Basically, what happens is sometimes when the model is created, like either in Fusion or whatever program somebody's using, or for some reason like something between the modeling program and Bambu Studio goes awry, it'll have like these little error codes or whatever. So basically, sometimes the printer will have problems printing your models, like that errors and stuff in there. So what you can always do is you can always click on the repair button, and depending on how many errors are on that, kind of basically determines how long it's going to take to repair. So we'll go ahead and repair our model just really quickly here. Actually, just going to go through all this right here. Actually, no, we'll go and cancel that. Actually, it might take too long. What we can do is fill our bed with copies like we did with the cookie cutter example. It's going to have 6 different versions of Pikachu on here. And so if we go ahead and slice our plates the way it is, give that a second here. See, Julia says, do you ever change the purge amounts? I feel like lately it's purging so much. Sometimes I do. There's a setting called flushing volumes in the purge settings itself. I haven't experimented with it too much. I know that Bambu Studio itself had an update recently, like in their software itself, that kind of basically lowered the amount of filament waste that there used to be. And so sometimes, if you find like it's purging too much, I think there's a way you can change the volumes in it to basically purge less. But I haven't really played around with it too much for that. Alright, so while that's going, I'm slicing that plate. We'll go ahead and go on to another example of a way that you can minimize your filament waste. So go ahead and we'll go ahead and load up another model. We'll go ahead and load up this chocolate chip cookie dragon. Actually, no, that's the wrong one. We'll do another project. We'll get to that at a different time. do a little W Christmas tree ornament because it has a lot of color changes in there. And then we'll also load up our dragon that we used earlier in this Facebook Live. Alright, so what you can do is, so we're going to go ahead and scale our dragon down a little bit smaller. Okay, so when you have a multicolor print like this, it's going to have a bunch of different color changes. There's a few different things you can do. So when you right click on this model right here, and you can go to where our flush options are. So under our others tab for our printer settings, under where like a multicolor thing is, we have our prime tower, which we can turn on and off if we need to. We also have this flush options ability as well. It says we either flush our filament waste into our infill, so we can save some filament that way, but basically taking some of that filament waste and purge poop, instead of putting it down the chute, we can put it into the infill that we have for our model as well. If our model had any supports, we could put that filament waste into the support as well, so we can save filament that way. Another thing that we can do is if we right click and go down where it says flush options, we can flush it into this dragon right here. So sometimes what people do when they have a bunch of like multicolor prints that they want to not waste a whole bunch of filament on, they add little extra things to their plates so they can flush that filament into. They don't really care about what color it is. It could be like a little fidget cube or like a little keychain or like a little dragon or whatever. But you can flush these colors into this dragon if you wanted to basically, essentially get like two models for the price of one, essentially. Let's see. Ellen says, I know basically nothing about these printers. This may be a silly question, but is there anything you can do with the filament waste? Is it reusable in any way? No, it's not a silly question. I know a lot of people have basically taken all their filament poop and they put it into like silicone molds essentially, and they put it into like a convection oven or whatever, and basically just melt it down into the molds itself and print like little stars or like little skull faces or like little Christmas trees or whatever, and kind of like make little like molds that way. I wouldn't recommend doing that just because when filament is heated up to like high temperatures and put through the nozzle and stuff, there are some fumes that come off. And so when you're basically putting a ton of filament into your oven, essentially into like a silicone mold, and you're letting that melt down into a liquid, and then you're adding more filament to that to melt down and add to a liquid and stuff, it's just going to fill your entire house up with just a bunch of this nasty toxic fumes. So some people don't really do that, and it's going to basically destroy your oven. So if you do want to go that route, I would just get like a disposable like convection oven, like from Goodwill or somewhere, and do that outside or in the garage or somewhere where you don't mind, the fumes getting in the way, because it will stink up your house from other people that do that. I know like some people basically, I saw that get like little plastic ball ornaments like from the dollar store or whatever. They put like little filament poop scraps in there and kind of like have it as a an ornament that they do. Some other people have made like little like wall decorations or home decor things, like a little picture frame or whatever with the filament scraps. So there are some uses for it out there, but for the most part, there's not really a way to reuse it commercially, anyways, and not really anything that's like super viable. So pretty much for the most part, it's trashed out. There are some people like in the Bambu printing groups, like other 3D printing groups, who are constantly like looking for people to ship them their filament poop for money. So sometimes people do that, like they ship them their bags or boxes or whatever, and they use it for whatever the purposes they need to. But for the most part, there's not really anything that you can actually do with your filament waste. So if we have our multicolor little W's, it's a good question though, because I know I've been trying to find ways to use up mine, but there's just not really anything viable for me to take care of. And so what we can do is we click on this dragon here. We don't really care about what the colors are going to be. We can right click it, and we can go down to where it says flush options, and we can do flush into this object. And this only works if you basically have your secondary object roughly the same size or smaller than what your object is. And so what you can do is once you get that selected, and then you do slice plate. Takes a few seconds here. Don't need to worry about that. It's for this dragon that's complaining about. Okay, so when we slice our plate, we have a multicolored model. Basically, it tells us which colors are being used. It tells us like how much filament is being used for the actual model itself. It's telling us how much is actually getting flushed into the poop chute or a secondary object that we have here. And then it tells us how much is being flushed into our perch tower here in the back. And then it tells us the total amounts of filament that we use. It tells you like how many times it changes color. So it changes color 88 times. And it also tells you about how long it takes to prepare the printer to print, and it tells you how long it's going to take to print as well. And so if you look, you can kind of see our little dragon here that has basically different layers of white and red. So if we were to like print this dragon out, actually, based on all the color changes that we'll have, basically you have like a red and white stripe, essentially like a candy cane dragon, essentially. So when you go from layer to layer, so we kind of go through this little green bar right here, basically tells you where along the slicing program your model is. So the further on you drag it down, the further along your model is going to be. So if you look here, we have our outer walls right here, we have our infill pattern, and as we go up and down, we can kind of see how the model itself changes. And so each layer is going to print the whites, and then it's going to stop, and then it's going to swap, and it's going to purge all the white filament out of it into either the infill itself, or it's going to purge into this dragon, and then it's going to purge the rest into the poop chute, and it's going to change it over to red. But then when it changes over, it's going to put it into the prime tower to make sure all the white filament is completely off of the nozzle, and then it's going to print the red, and so on and so on. And then it's just going to continue to print up and up and up until the model is all done. And that's another way that you can kind of help reduce some of the wasted filament that you would have, rather than putting it down into the filament waste chute. You can either put it into the model's infill itself, or you can select a secondary model to purge into as well. And so if we go back to our Pikachu example, so another reason that you want to kind of fill up the bed with copies to prevent a bunch of filament waste is because the amount of waste for multicolor prints is going to be the same whether you have like 1 copy or 1,000 copies on your bed. So if you look right here, we have for 6 copies of the Pikachu, we have basically essentially 20 grams of wasted filament total. But then if you just take away all but one of them, then reslice our plate, and what does that? We'll go ahead and go back to this other plate and do another example. So we'll go ahead and do a new project for this one. Go ahead and open up that chocolate chip dragon cookie again. I'll give another example of how you can also really use the power of the AMS and multicolor printing. So go ahead and take away this milk carton because we don't need it for this example. And so what you can also do is Bambu Studio has this really cool feature called color painting. What it allows you to do is basically, with the filaments that you have loaded into your AMS, is it allows you to basically change the colors of what's on here. Because sometimes when you upload a file, it'll upload it either as one color or as multicolors. And sometimes when the designer will either hand paint the file itself using this technique, or sometimes it'll be like in different parts. Let's see. Angie says, can you use an iPad or your phone for this, or does it have to be a laptop? The printer will be a Bambu A1 Mini. If you want to do any slicing like this, you have to use a laptop. iPads and iPhones and phones don't support this technology yet. The Bambu Handy app does have the ability to take like a model that you find, like on the Bambu Maker World app, and send it to your printer to print. But you can't change any settings like this at all. Basically, those print like whatever default settings are on the app itself. Kim Gordon asks, newbie question, when you're opening files, are those STL files? For the most part, yes. Yes and no. There's a more complicated answer behind that, but basically they're all STL files. There's just different file formats and stuff that basically like allows it to be pre-colored like this, but for the most part they're just all STL files. Alright, so we go to this guy. So over here in this process tab we have what's called global and objects, and basically that's going to apply to, say for example we have this one, have two dragons on here for example. So now we have two dragons, so we have two objects basically. And so global refers to everything that's on the board and the heap bed itself, whereas objects just refers to everything, just one specific thing. So we have one object, just one dragon, and another object is this other dragon. So we can individually change specific settings, for each model that we wanted to. If we wanted to have this one print like in a different color, for example, or if we want to have this one print faster and this one print slower, or whatever reason, depending on what your needs of whatever it is you're printing, you could change the settings on here. Sometimes you can also change the colors in these models as well. I'll try to get to an example of that a little bit later. But if we go back to our painting example, you can click on our color painting, and so it brings up our 4 filament colors and these different kinds of painting options. So for example, if we kind of zoom in to like the eye of this dragon right here, and if we wanted to change it to like a red for example, we could select our red filaments, and we can change. What I like to do is, for the most part, I like to do this like autofill option, because it'll automatically have edge detection on, because it automatically, basically through the power of the software, kind of figure out where like edges are in certain areas. So for example, if we wanted to make the eye red, we would just click on this and it'll automatically paint it red. Or if we want to click on this chocolate chip, it would paint it red. If we want to do like a different color, like if you want to make like this eye white for example, we could click on our whites, make sure the fill is detected. We could make that white. So it's pretty handy if you kind of want to basically custom color whatever files that you have. Like if you wanted to just have, like make these all white chocolate chip cookies, you could. So if you wanted to make these chocolate chips, white instead of brown, you could if you wanted to. You could also, if you wanted to, specifically like do different designs on it, you could. Like if you wanted to, like do like a circle or like red on here. You could do that if you wanted to, and print with the red outs. You could adjust your pen size to make it bigger or smaller if you wanted to get like fine details or like that. I haven't done painting too much really, so I haven't really explored like all the options it has, but I use it sometimes basically to kind of like to custom colors on models as well. Alright, so let's go ahead and go back to our Pikachu example. And if you remember, when we had 6 copies of the Pikachu multicolor ornament on here, we had 20 grams of wasted filaments. And if you just had 1 copy on here, we still have the same amount, 20 grams of wasted filaments as well. So we could print one of these if we wanted to, and get 20 grams of waste, or we could fill the entire bed and have more of these, and still, only have the same amount of waste. I mean, it will take longer the more you put on here to print, but the amount of waste that you have is always going to be the same. So if you're like printing like ornaments or whatever, or like little toys, if you want to like sell it like at a market or whatever, like you could. it's actually more beneficial to load up your plate entirely and let it print, so the amount of waste that you have is the same, so that you're not wasting all that extra filament, but you're actually getting more product to sell. Alright, let me see what else we can talk about. A couple more things, I'll let you guys go for the night. I didn't realize how late it's getting, so I'm trying to bore you for too much longer. Do a couple more examples, and we'll be done. I will have probably another live in another month or so, with like kind of basically like live videos of different examples of some of these I've been talking about, like actual like physical prints, so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Because there's like no way for me to do a screen share and a webcam at the same time, it was just easier to do this one now and another one later. Alright, so let's go ahead and open up one more project here. Go ahead and open up this example. Where'd it go? I didn't open it up. Let me go find it really quick. Alright, so basically what we can do, I'm going to show you how to use the cut command. It's also a very powerful tool within Bambu Studio itself. And this is basically what I use to create these cylinder holders for my multi-board that allows me to hold my flavorings and gel colors as well. Because the ones that they had on the website itself weren't quite the right size I needed, so I had to basically custom make my own in Fusion 360, and in Bambu Studio I'm kind of basically, trial and error everything to kind of get it to work to where I needed to. So this one right here, this little cube, is the original part that they had on the website I got the project from. And so what I did was I used what's called the cut command to basically take this back part right here, which is actually what connects to my multi-board in my office, which hangs on my wall, to this cylinder holder right here. And so what I would do is I'm going ahead and I'm going to cut this one off too, actually, so I can show it better. So we use the cut command. It brings up this little thing right here. And what it's going to do is it's going to basically cut your model at this line wherever it is. So you can move it up and down as you need to. You can also rotate it to be up and down or vertically. You can have it at an angle if you needed to. So what I did is I make sure it's up all the way at vertical, and then I just moved it basically back as far as I could. So I'm going to just cut this off, and what's going to do is when it cuts right here, you can have it cut to parts, which is what we want to do, because when it cuts to parts, it's going to cut, this is one part, and this is another part. And what we can do is we can then use these two parts separately if we need to for whatever projects we wanted. So what I did is I just basically cut the one part from the other thing and glued it onto here. So this little white line right here is going to tell us where it's going to make the cut, and this blue is going to be one object, and this purple is going to be another object. This is really useful kind of if you're doing like a more advanced modeling techniques, or if you find like one file that you like but you don't want to have a part of it, or if you like find a multicolor prints that you want to kind of cut off to make the printing time go a lot quicker, you could do that as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically kind of move this as much as possible, and I'm going to do cut to parts, and then we'll make sure we keep all of our extra carts as well. We'll do perform cut, and now we have not work. There we go. Now we have two separate pieces. So I was able to basically cut this part off of this cube and then take it. I was able to basically merge it onto my cylinder that I made. So this is the part that I made in Fusion, and I needed a way to connect this part with this part to make it actually stand on my wall. So I had to cut this off of here, and then if you want to basically glue parts back together, what you can do is you can just select them and move them to wherever you need it to. And then once it's basically in the right place that you want to, then you can just select both of the parts together. You can right click in it, and then you can merge them together. So now they're back to one part again. This is very handy if you're trying to split up different projects that you want to do, or if you have, like if you want to make a multi-cutter, you could probably do it this way as well. Like if you want to basically just make one rectangle and copy it a bunch of times, or if you want to take that multi-color rectangle we had earlier with the 4 rectangles, and you want to cut that into just 4 separate rectangles to make 4 separate cutters, you could do that as well. Alright, we'll do I think one more example of cutting as a way to make multicolor printing easier. Go ahead and open up gingerbread house. Log cabin that I actually made for my kids for a Santa camp down. It's a very big file. There's a lot of pieces to it because basically you build a log cabin from the ground up, and each day you add another log piece to it. So another way that you can use the cut command to make multicolor printing a lot easier is what I did is I wanted to cut this wreath off of the log cabin roof here, because I knew that if I tried to print it, it basically had like a billion color changes on it, and I didn't want to waste a ton of filament and waste a ton of time. And I wanted to print this as quickly as possible. So what I did is I just selected and I used the cut command again. And then I just rotated it. At 90 degrees, so it's vertical up and down. And I just moved it ever so closely to the edge of the wreath itself. And if you kind of watch, you can kind of see like a little silhouette that kind of tells you like where along the line it is. So you just want to go until it just basically gets off of the log cabin itself. So you have no more white circles on the wood part. And you can and then you can just cut it to parts. And fix whatever it's talking about there. Alright, so let's finish what I was talking about. Let's perform the cut. Now we can split those again to two different objects. We have the log cabin, then we have the wreath as well. For some reason, like this model had like the wreath basically pre-printed inside the cabin as well, but you pretty much get the idea that you could basically just put all these back together. So if you wanted, you could just come back here and you take out these extra back portions as well that you don't need, and then you could just select all of these objects together and just merge them back into one big body. And then you have one the two separate objects. You have the wreath that you can do as one multicolor print. The log cabin you can do as one print as well, just one color. And then what you can do is you can just glue that using super glue or Gorilla Glue or something. You can just glue that back onto the log cabin, and that'll just save you a ton of time and filament and money, and just a ton, just in time in general. All right, I think that's pretty much it that I've covered. One more thing, there's different programs that you can use to design your cookie cutters or models and stuff. I started out with Fusion 360, which is what I used to make this rectangle multicolor. Kind of basically just make a bunch of different shapes and sketches and stuff. I know there's other versions of programs out there that you can use as well. There's Tinkercad that you can make cookie cutters inside of. You can also do other modeling as well, just like with different 3D models. There's a Cookie Design Lab, which was introduced in the event that should not be named until next year, where you can basically upload a shape that you want to. So I uploaded my business logo, and then you can just basically make a cookie cutter out of that. You also have CookieCAD, which is very easy and user intuitive, that you can do the same thing. You can upload a shape and you can make a cutter, or you can make an imprint cutter or a stamp or cutter set, or make a practice cookie, like if you want to do practice cookie to do a royal icing on, if you want to make practice cookies for using your Eddie printer on, you can do that as well. So like if you wanted to make a cookie cutter out of your business logo like I did here, but then you also want to make a practice cookie with it so that you can do Eddie print on there, you could do the cookie cutter to cut out the cookie, and then you can also to do it in real life, and then you can also make a practice cookie with this inside shape as well to put in your Eddie. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you very much, guys. I really enjoyed doing this video. I didn't realize how late it's getting, but there's a lot of information to cover, and that's just basically scratching the top of the surface for what we have. I'm going to have this video saved and recorded to the Sugar Cookie Marketing Group and also to the Cookie College as well. Again, if you are just watching the replay, make sure you type replay in the comments so I kind of know we're caught up, so I can kind of answer your questions in case you weren't able to join us. And if you have any other questions, I know a lot of you got new Bambu printers over the Black Friday sale or getting stuff for Christmas or whatever. Just feel free to shoot me a message either via Facebook or email. I'll try my best to answer any questions that you do have. Thanks again. You guys have a great night.